Tonight on Philly Sports Spotlight, the 100th Tour de France is come and gone, but denounced champ Lance Armstrong insists the race cannot be won without a little help. And it's a gamble that unfortunately may have cost former cycling champ from Britain Tom Simpson his life during the 1967 Tour. And if diamonds are a girl's best friend, then Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson may have hit the jackpot with the release of his new single.
Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Yes or no? Was one of those banned substances EPO?
Yes.
Did you ever blood dope or use blood transfusions to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Did you ever use any other banned substances like testosterone, cortisone, or human growth hormone?
Yes.
Yes or no? In all 7 of your Tour de France victories, did you ever take banned substances or blood dope?
Yes.
That, of course, was former Tour de France champ Lance Armstrong finally coming clean to Oprah Winfrey about his cheating ways in all 7 of his Tour victories. Good evening and welcome to Philly Sports Spotlight. I'm Phil Andrews, and despite Armstrong's absence, a cloud still looming large over cycling's most storied event. British cyclist Chris Froome won this year's Tour title, but if you listen to Armstrong, he says there's absolutely no way Froome could win this without a little help. During a recent interview prior to this year's Tour de France, Lance was quoted as saying this: "It depends on which races you want to win. The Tour de France, impossible to win it without dope. The Tour is a test of endurance where oxygen is the decisive factor. EPO, for example, is not going to help a sprinter over 100 meters, but will make a difference to a 10,000 meter runner. That's obvious." Armstrong also went on to say that for many reasons, it will never finish. "I didn't invent doping. It didn't stop with me. I simply took part in a system that already existed. I'm a human being. Doping has existed since antiquity and will no doubt always exist. I know it's not a popular thing to say, but unfortunately, it is a reality." Of course, Armstrong never tested positive for anything during his competitive days, somehow finding a way to beat the odds, if you will. And while you may or may not disagree with what he says, the Tour de France has been full of cheaters during its 100-plus year existence.
As a matter of fact, the 1904 Tour de France may have been one of the most scandalous, as riders were punished for taking shortcuts and using cars and trains. There was also the story of race favorite Maurice Guerin, who was beaten up by rival supporters. The following year, there was the throwing of nails on the course, a practice that apparently continued through several of the following tours. It wasn't until the 1920s that riders started to seek chemical assistance to help them through their treacherous trek. News of this practice came about when brothers Francis and Henri Pellissier bragged to journalists that they, quote, had cocaine to go in their eyes, chloroform for their gums, and that they kept going on dynamite. Henri Pellissier actually won the 1923 Tour title, making him an instant French cycling hero. Of course, not all competitors relied on dynamite. It was common practice for cyclists to actually drink alcohol during the race. That is, until the 1960s, when the French passed a law forbidding the use of stimulants in the sport. Doping tests were eventually introduced in the mid-60s, and along with it began the long history of riders trying to fool doctors. Perhaps one of the most famous cases was that of Michael Pollentier, who was disqualified in 1978 after it was discovered he had an elaborate system of tubes running from his armpit to his private parts containing clean urine. And of course, in more recent years, well, the Tour has had to deal with riders using testosterone and with doping. With that in mind, it was American Floyd Landis, winner of the 2006 Tour de France, who became the first champ to ever be stripped of his title because of doping. Now, initially, Landis maintained his innocence, denying the use of performance-enhancing drugs, but later confessed while accusing others, including Lance Armstrong.
You know, I really don't know what the solution is for the sport of cycling. That's not my issue anymore. You know, I can never undo what happened. I can never undo having lied to people, but if in some small way making restitution helps them to forgive me, then that's a step in the right direction. I don't wish to go through the rest of my life feeling that people have animosity towards me for the decisions that I made that were not the right decision.
Landis, a native of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, has often referred to the sport of pro cycling as organized crime. Ironically, it was he who was found guilty of defrauding both donors to his defense fund and for defrauding federal government officials in a whistleblowing lawsuit against Armstrong.
Floyd Landis, as he has now publicly recognized, compounded his errors by lying to thousands and thousands of individuals and defrauding them out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The repayment plan, as it stands now, covers every penny that went through the Floyd Fairness Fund that raised money on the basis of his claims that he didn't use performance-enhancing drugs. That's roughly $487,000, and it comprises over 1,700 individuals.
There's a structured way of making restitution to the people who feel that they were victims of the alleged fraud, and for me, it's a way of putting it in the past and moving forward.
Now, Landis, by the way, was one of only 3 American cyclists to win the Tour de France. Armstrong and 3-time winner Greg LeMond were the other 2, but unfortunately LeMond is the only one still recognized as a former champ. Okay, time now for this week's trivia question, and trust me, this one's so obscure I really don't expect any of you to know this, but it's just my way of dropping a little knowledge on you, if you will. During its 100-year-plus existence, how many riders have actually competed in the Tour de France? Answer, of course, coming up a little bit later on in the show. Also still to come, the life and death story of Englishman Tom Simpson. Stay tuned.